This is the burial place of Henry Cresswell. He was the first recorded burial here at the churchyard of Sinking Spring. Cresswell and a few other men were staying at Black's Fort as the Indians were attacking in 1776. Cresswell, Charles Cummings, Cummings' slave Job, and James Piper were taking a wagon up what is now known as Russell Road, going up to Cresswell's plantation up on Porterfield to get supplies to bring back to the fort. As they crossed over the hill a few hundred feet north of here, the Indians jumped out and attacked them. James Piper lost his little finger in the gun battle. Cummings told his slave Job to return fire. They did, and they chased off to the Indians. The folks back at Black's Fort heard the gunfire, knew something was going on, and they came and rescued Piper and Cresswell, took their bodies back to the fort, and then Cresswell was buried here. A number of Cresswell's orphan children married into the other families, and many of them are buried here. James Piper is buried back over this way a few hundred feet, and Cresswell is just recognized as the first burial here. This is the burial site of William King, one of the wealthiest men to live in Abington. William King was born in Ireland, came here with his father and other family members, married in with Conley Finley, and was involved in the salt-making operation at Saltville. He made literally millions of dollars in today's money, became one of the wealthiest people around. His salt was shipped down the North Holston River to Kingsport, and then loaded on larger barges and shipped further south from there. So William King died in 1808. We don't know exactly why, but he was in his late 30s at the time. As part of his will, William King left $10,000 in 1808 money to establish a school here. It became known as the William King Institute. And that building is behind us. It is now the William King Museum of Art. Over the years, it served as a high school and for other purposes. But William King, that's part of the legacy that some of the leaders of this community established as far as education was concerned. On this knoll behind me is the probable location of the first and second Sinking Spring Presbyterian Church buildings. The first one was made of unhewn timbers, about 40 feet wide and about 80 to 100 feet long, which, if you think about it, was a massive operation for people without power tools, with just manual labor, to build this place to meet and worship. That was the first building. The second building was built a few years later because of the growth of the congregation. The congregation continued to meet here until the 1830s, at which time the new church building was built in town, a mile or so further back east of us. And this property was abandoned as far as worship activity was concerned. It then became a cemetery, and since then over 2,100 people have been buried here. This was established by a family in the 1800s. For whatever reason, they decided they wanted to have a mound over their future burial site. So they established this. When John Hunt Morgan died, when he was killed during the Civil War, he was first brought here, and temporarily his body was kept in this mound, which was still empty. There was a funeral procession here in Abington that proceeded down Main Street with hundreds of people coming for the temporary burial. A number of years later, after the Reconstruction campaign started, his body was removed to Richmond. Martin, John Henry Martin. He died in 1899, so this mound was here from at least the 1850s and 60s until Mr. Martin was buried here with his wife. This is the grave of John Bradley, another one of the Revolutionary War soldiers who are buried here. We have at least 9 Revolutionary War soldiers buried here at Sinking Spring. We believe the original church was located off to the west here, and so this burial in 1819 would have been in the churchyard while those log buildings were still standing here. The other burials where the church building or the meeting house originally stood were added later as the building had been removed. John Floyd is buried down there. He was not only a governor, but he was Secretary of War for James Buchanan the 4 years before the war broke out, and was very controversial because he sent a lot of military supplies of the United States to some of the forts in the South, like Fort Sumter. And there was controversy, in fact, congressional hearings about whether he was literally giving away United States government assets to what was going to become the Confederacy, and therefore being a traitor to the United States. As a testament to the wealth of some of the families, especially after the Civil War in Abingdon, families would dedicate monuments like these to their family members who'd pass away. These are some of the wealthier people who lived in Abingdon during the years between the Civil War and the First World War, who did business here, were prominent property owners, town council members and mayors, and prominent individuals in the community. But as fancy as these headstones are, that was simply a testament of the family members who survived, showing their appreciation and love for their deceased. John Campbell was one of the Revolutionary War veterans that we were talking about. He was born in 1742 and lived until 1825. Again, that was before the log buildings were removed here, so this would have been in the courtyard, the churchyard of the original log church buildings. A very elaborate text talking about his participation in the French and Indian Wars, the Battle of Point Pleasant, and all the things that he did in the community. He was a very prominent citizen, and the Campbells are known throughout this area as prominent people in the community, several generations of Campbells, and going back to their days in Scotland and Ireland before they came here. This is another example of the story of the families that intermarried. This is Elizabeth Preston, who was the wife of Arthur Cummings. Arthur Cummings was a descendant of Charles Cummings, of course, and the Prestons, of course, have lots of connections in this area of Southwest Virginia. So these families, the prominent families, made a point of intermarrying with each other because it's how they preserved their family wealth moving forward for the future generations. David Campbell was one of two governors who are buried here at Sinking Spring. He was part of the Campbell family that played such a significant role in the development of this area. He was a governor during the years before the Civil War, and he was succeeded by Wyndham Robertson, who later lived here in Washington County. Campbell is one of the favorite people, one of the most recognized and honored people in Abingdon's history.